Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel deep into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Canada, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying horror stories ever recorded. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people who never expected their lives to collide with pure terror. From abandoned cabins swallowed by snow to creatures lurking beyond the tree line, from disappearances that defy explanation to basements hiding unspeakable secrets. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to stay buried. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Canada, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Miller, and this happened when I was 26, working as a fire lookout contractor in Northern Ontario. I took the job because I needed isolation. After my divorce, silence felt safer than people. The tower sat alone in a sea of black spruce and frozen lakes, the nearest town over an hour away by logging road. No cell service, no neighbors, just wind, snow, and trees that never stopped moving. The locals warned me on my first supply run. They said not to follow sounds at night, not voices, not whistles. One man refused to say more, only crossing himself before walking away. The first week was quiet, too quiet. Then, on the 8th night, while logging wind patterns, I heard it. Soft, deliberate whistling, not a tune, just notes, drifting up from the forest below the tower. It sounded close, and somehow curious. At first, I convinced myself it was wind slipping through branches. That's what logic demanded. But wind doesn't pause. It doesn't listen. The whistling stopped the moment I stepped onto the tower's balcony. The forest went dead silent, like everything below was holding its breath. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes, flashlight sweeping the tree line, seeing nothing but snow and shadows. When I went back inside, the whistling started again, closer this time, below the stairs. I locked the hatch and laughed nervously, telling myself it was an owl or some trick of acoustics. Still, I slept with my boots on. The next morning, I found footprints circling the base of the tower. Bare footprints. Long, deep, too large to belong to any animal I knew. What terrified me wasn't their size. It was that they never moved away. They just went around and around, like something had been waiting for me to come down. By the 3rd night after the footprints appeared, the whistling returned with purpose. It wasn't random anymore. It came in patterns, repeating the same sequence of notes every night at exactly 1:17 a.m. I started logging it like weather data, pretending that made it harmless. I noticed something worse soon after. The sound was no longer coming from the forest floor. It was higher, as if whatever made it had learned how tall my tower was. One night, while forcing myself to eat cold beans, the whistle changed. It tried to copy me. I had coughed earlier that evening, and now between the notes, I heard a rough imitation of that cough. Broken, wrong. I shut off the lights and hid near the radio, heart hammering. Then the voice came, soft, almost polite. Ethan. It said my name the way my ex-wife used to when she was tired. That was when I realized the locals hadn't warned me about animals. They warned me about listeners. I tried calling base the next morning, my voice shaking so badly I barely recognized it as my own. Static answered first. Then someone whispered back through the radio, breathing, slow and wet. I threw the headset across the room. When I looked out the window, I saw movement between the trees. Tall, too thin. It stood perfectly still, facing the tower, head tilted like it was studying me. I told myself not to look for too long. Predators like attention. That night, the whistling came from the stairs. Metal steps creaked under invisible weight, one by one, slow and patient. The hatch handle rattled gently, as if testing it. Then the voice spoke again, clearer now. "You forgot to come down." That's when I understood its goal. It didn't want to kill me up there. It wanted me where the forest could close in, and it was willing to wait as long as it took. By the fifth night, sleep had become impossible. I dozed in short bursts, waking every time the tower creaked or the wind shifted. The whistling no longer stayed outside. Sometimes I heard it echo inside the walls, like the sound was trapped with me. I stopped using my name altogether. I was afraid it was listening, learning the weight of it. Instead, I spoke in half sentences, muttering nonsense when I had to talk aloud. That afternoon, I noticed something carved into the wooden stairs leading up the tower. Deep grooves, fresh and jagged, like fingers had dragged themselves upward. No tools could have done that. At sunset, I packed my emergency bag. I planned to wait until morning when fear might feel manageable. But at midnight, the whistling stopped completely. Silence flooded the forest, thick and unnatural. Then came 3 knocks on the hatch, slow, polite, and a whisper that said, "Your turn?" I snapped. Fear became movement. I threw on my coat, kicked open the emergency hatch, and started down the ladder with my flashlight shaking so badly the beam danced across the trees. Halfway down, I heard breathing below me. Slow, patient, enjoying the moment. I dropped the rest of the way, landing hard in the snow, pain screaming up my legs. I didn't look back. I ran. The forest swallowed me instantly. Trees closed in, branches grabbing at my clothes like hands. Behind me, the whistling started again, right behind my ear now. I tripped and rolled into a clearing. My flashlight beam caught it fully for the first time. Its face wasn't a face. It was an arrangement. Eyes set too high, mouth stretched vertically, skin pale like frozen bark. It didn't chase me. It stepped aside, letting me pass. That was worse, because it meant the forest ahead belonged to it too. I ran until my lungs burned and the cold sliced through my chest like glass. The forest didn't thin out the way it should have. Every direction looked the same, as if the trees were rearranging themselves around me. The whistling moved with me, never ahead, never behind. Always just out of reach, circling. Sometimes it came from above, drifting through the branches. Sometimes it came from the ground, vibrating through the snow under my boots. I found an old logging shack near dawn, half collapsed and buried in ice. I barricaded the door with rotting planks and curled into a corner, shaking so hard my teeth cracked together. That's when I heard it outside, right against the wall. It wasn't whistling anymore. It was practicing my voice, repeating my panicked breathing, my sobs, my prayers. Then it spoke clearly, calmly, with perfect patience. "Come out, Ethan. You're lost." I stayed in that shack for 2 days. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. Every few hours, it came back, circling the structure, testing the walls, tapping softly like it was counting time. On the second night, it stopped pretending. The voice dropped the imitation and spoke in something older, deeper, layered with echoes. The sound vibrated in my bones, making my vision blur. "You were not meant to climb," it said. "You were meant to listen." I covered my ears, but it didn't matter. The words were inside me. I felt memories slipping, faces, names, entire years fading like smoke. At dawn, silence returned, real silence, birds, wind, life. I ran until I hit the road and collapsed in front of a logging truck. They took me to a hospital in Thunder Bay. The doctors said exposure caused my memory loss, but they couldn't explain why, sometimes, when I'm alone. I whistle without realizing it. Recovery didn't feel like survival. It felt like delay. After I was released from the hospital, I tried to rebuild something that resembled a normal life. I moved south, closer to people, closer to noise. Silence made my skin crawl. But the forest followed me in smaller ways. I started noticing patterns. Streetlights flickering in rhythm, wind slipping between buildings with that same familiar cadence. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself standing on my balcony, leaning forward like I was listening for something far below. The worst part was the dreams. I was back in the tower, but this time the hatch was open. I'd look down and see nothing but darkness stretching forever. From that void came the whistling, slower now, confident. One morning, I woke to find muddy footprints on my apartment floor. Bare, long, melted into the carpet as the sun rose. I didn't call the police, because deep down, I knew it wasn't visiting. It was checking on me. I understand the truth now. It never wanted my body. It wanted my attention, my listening. Some nights, when the world quiets just enough, I feel that same pull, the urge to step outside, to lean into the dark, to answer when something calls my name. I fight it every time. But the whistling has changed. It doesn't come from outside anymore. It comes from my chest, from my throat, like something learned how to live there. Sometimes strangers turn to look at me in elevators or on empty sidewalks, their faces pale with recognition. I see it in their eyes. They've heard it before. That's why I'm telling you this. Not as a warning, but as a confession. Because once you notice the sound, once you start listening, you never really stop. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods, and you hear whistling that seems to wait for you to respond, don't. Some things survive by being heard. My name is Caleb Rowan, and this happened when I was 31, working as a temporary communications technician in Nunavut. I was sent north to maintain a remote radio relay station that handled emergency signals for aircraft and research teams. I took the contract because it paid well, and because I believed technology made places safe. The station sat on a stretch of tundra so flat, it felt unreal, surrounded by ice and sky with nothing to interrupt the horizon. No trees, no roads, just snow, wind, and a building that hummed like it was breathing. The locals in the nearest settlement avoided the place. One elder warned me not to answer calls that didn't identify themselves. He said the land remembered voices. My first week passed quietly, filled with routine checks and static-filled nights. Then, during a routine scan at 2:04 a.m., I received a broadcast that wasn't on any registered frequency. It was my voice, calm, clear, and asking for help. I froze, staring at the console as the transmission repeated. The voice used my cadence, my pauses, even my breathing patterns. It introduced itself as me, then described an emergency I hadn't experienced, equipment failure, rising cold, time running out. I cut the signal. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the headset. I ran diagnostics, checked logs, rerouted channels. Nothing explained it. The broadcast hadn't come from any direction. It hadn't come from anywhere at all. An hour later, the station's backup recorder played the message again on its own. This time, The voice sounded strained, panicked. "Caleb, please," it said. "It's getting closer." I stepped outside into the wind, needing distance from the sound. The tundra stretched endlessly, pale and empty. But far away, on the horizon, I saw a black shape rising slowly from the ice. It wasn't moving toward me. It was unfolding. And the radio behind me began to scream. I stumbled back inside, slamming the heavy door against the wind. The station's lights flickered as the broadcast repeated itself, louder now, distorted, almost alive. Every word it spoke wasn't just heard. It resonated through the floor, through my bones. I tried calling the base for help, but the phone lines went dead. Satellite uplinks were down. Even my GPS flickered in and out, showing nothing but endless white. The place had become its own world, disconnected from reality. Then I noticed the logs. Every recording, every file I had saved that day had been overwritten with that same voice. Every message, every note, every technical report, I wasn't even sure they had existed. And the shape outside was closer. I could see detail now. Jagged edges, black like tar, but moving in patterns that defied physics. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally across the tundra. It wasn't just a thing. It was a distortion, and it knew I was listening. By nightfall, the temperature inside the station had dropped dramatically. Frost formed on the walls, windows, and even the consoles. My breath fogged the air, each exhale sounding unnaturally loud in the dead silence. I tried to hide in the storage room, the broadcast crackling insistently through every speaker. My voice came next, screaming from the radio, panicked and pleading, repeating exactly what I had just shouted in fear. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound didn't come from the speakers. It was everywhere, inside the room, inside me. Then a knock came at the metal door. Slow, heavy, and impossible to locate. The shape outside was gone, replaced by footprints in the snow leading up to the station. They weren't human. Long, deep, dragging as if something massive had walked upright, but with an unnatural gait. I realized with a surge of terror that it had followed me, and I was the last broadcast it wanted to hear. I couldn't think. My mind raced, and every rational thought dissolved in panic. I grabbed my winter jacket and the emergency pack, determined to escape across the frozen tundra. The wind tore at me, biting my skin, and the snow made every step an effort. The broadcast followed me. My own voice, crying, calling for help, repeating over and over. It warped with each replay, now mimicking the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow around me. Every shadow became a moving threat. Every drift of snow hid something alive. After hours of stumbling through the white expanse, I came upon a small ice fissure, a natural crevice in the tundra. I squeezed inside, hoping the shape couldn't follow. Silence returned. I thought I had survived. But then the broadcast started again, softer, closer, inside my skull. It whispered my secrets, my fears, the things I hadn't told anyone. It didn't want me to escape. It wanted to catalog everything about me. Time lost meaning. Hours or days I couldn't tell. I slept fitfully in the ice fissure, but the whispers never stopped. Sometimes they spoke directly in my voice, sometimes in strange, alien tones that I didn't understand but felt in my chest. I realized I couldn't leave. Every attempt to move brought the broadcast back, louder, more invasive, following me even inside the fissure. I wasn't outside anymore. The tundra was inside me. That's when I saw something else. Faint lights in the distance, moving too perfectly to be stars. Shapes began to form around them, humanoid, yet wrong. Limbs bent in impossible angles, bodies shifting like liquid metal. They circled the lights, weaving patterns across the snow. And wherever they passed, the sound of radio static and whistling rose to a crescendo. And then I understood the truth. I was witnessing the source of the voice. Something that had been broadcasting itself for centuries. Something that fed on attention, on fear, on voices. And now, it had me. I don't know how long I stayed in that fissure. Hours? Days? Time had no meaning. Every attempt to leave was met with my own voice, now twisted, mocking, and filled with static. It knew my every move before I even made it. Finally, desperation overtook me. I crawled out under the dim aurora, stumbling across the ice toward what I thought was safety. The shapes followed, silent, gliding over the snow, leaving trails that shimmered like oil in the moonlight. The broadcast became a cacophony, echoing from every direction, layering my own screams with alien tones. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound penetrated deeper, inside my chest and skull. And then I heard a new sound. Laughter. Not human laughter, but something dry, clicking like ice breaking over hollow spaces. It circled me, waiting. I realized I hadn't been running from the shapes. I had been running toward them, and now there was no going back. I reached what I thought was the station, but it wasn't the same. The building had melted into the ice, its walls warped, antennas bending in impossible angles. Static hissed from every crack, every crevice, as if the station had become one with the tundra, and with it, the broadcasting presence. I stumbled inside, half expecting walls, floors, and ceilings to be solid. They weren't. Each step sank into cold mist, and my hands passed through surfaces that shouldn't have been hollow. The broadcast roared, filling the void. Then the voice spoke clearly, no longer my own. "Caleb, you belong here now." I tried to flee, but the shapes had surrounded the building, their forms merging with the wind and ice. They pressed close without touching, the sound of countless voices whispering and screaming. Panic consumed me. I realized I wasn't in Nunavut anymore. I was inside the signal, and it had been waiting. The next moments are a blur. I tried to run, but the ice beneath me rippled and shifted like liquid glass. The shapes weren't chasing me. They were folding space around me, guiding me, herding me, until I was at the center of a frozen amphitheater. The aurora above warped, bending into impossible angles, filling the sky with pulsing light. The broadcast became deafening, all voices layered together, my own unknown voices, alien tones, merging into a single message I couldn't escape. Listen, you belong. You are the signal now. I fell to my knees, realizing with horror that this presence didn't want my body alive. It wanted my perception, my awareness, my essence. Every thought, every memory, every heartbeat became part of the transmission. I screamed, but even my screams were broadcast back at me in real time, warped, overlapping, in every direction. When the light faded, I was no longer sure where I ended and the tundra began. I had become the last broadcast. I survived, or at least something that resembled survival. Somehow, I woke in a rescue helicopter hours later, frostbite on my fingers and lips, eyes glazed with shock. My memory was fragmented, but the voice remained. Soft, persistent. Inside my skull, back in civilization, every radio, every device, every broadcast reminded me of what had claimed a part of me. I hear it in static, in whistling wind, even in crowded streets when everything should be quiet. I can't escape it. The shapes are gone, but the signal remains, threaded through my mind. I speak into radio sometimes, not to warn, not to connect, but because I am compelled. I know it's still out there, waiting for the next voice, the next listener. And now anyone who hears this story may find themselves tuned in too. Be careful with empty channels. Be careful when the air goes silent. Some broadcasts never end. Some things survive because we listen. My name is Lydia Carr, and this happened when I was 28, working as a seasonal assistant keeper at a remote lighthouse on Prince Edward Island. I thought it would be peaceful. Fresh air, waves crashing, solitude. I was wrong. The lighthouse sat on a craggy cliff, battered by relentless Atlantic storms. Fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see your own hand at arm's length. And at night, the only light came from the rotating beacon above and the occasional lanterns in the keeper's quarters. The previous keeper had vanished a year earlier. Locals whispered that he left because he couldn't bear the watching, but when I asked directly, no one would elaborate. My first week was quiet, almost serene, until the fog brought voices. At first, they were faint murmurs carried on the wind, barely audible over the waves. Then they became whispers at the windows, soft, sibilant, saying things I didn't understand, but I felt their intent. One night, the lanterns flickered, and I saw shadows moving against the walls, though no one else was inside. The first clear incident happened on my fourth night. I was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, when I heard footsteps on the spiral stairs. Slow, deliberate, dragging slightly, as if someone weighed more than a normal person. "Hello?" I called, voice trembling. Nothing. Only the wind outside howled. I climbed the stairs to check the upper quarters. The bedroom door was ajar, even though I had locked it. Inside, the bed sheets were folded neatly, but not by me. And on the wall above the bed, a shadow shifted independently of the lantern light. It stretched, reaching toward the ceiling. I ran back downstairs, heart hammering, trying to convince myself it was my imagination, exhaustion, isolation. But then the whispers came closer, right behind me, hissing my name. "Lydia." And a cold hand brushed my shoulder, though the room was empty. I realized at that moment that I wasn't alone in the lighthouse. Something had been waiting. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the lighthouse, every gust of wind against the windows, felt like deliberate footsteps approaching me. I sat in the corner, hugging a blanket, whispering prayers I hadn't said since childhood. Around 2:13 a.m., the foghorn outside blew, a deep, mournful sound that reverberated through the walls. But it wasn't the usual timing. It had a pattern, a rhythm almost like Morse code. And then I heard it. Soft, metallic tapping on the glass panes, moving from one side of the room to the other. I held my breath. The lantern light flickered violently, and in one sudden flash, I saw her. A pale figure, long hair drifting in the air as if underwater, standing at the window. Her eyes were hollow, black, staring straight at me. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't meant for joy, and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, the fog lifted, and the world seemed normal again. Sunlight hit the waves and rocks, but the dread hadn't left me. I knew she wasn't gone. She was just waiting for darkness. I explored the lighthouse that day, trying to find an explanation. Nothing seemed unusual. No hidden doors, no signs of intruders. But in the keeper's log, I found entries from the previous occupant that chilled me to the bone. He wrote of voices, shadows, whispers, and cold touches. Then simply, "The light sees all." That night, the whispers returned, louder and closer. They weren't just at the windows, they were inside the walls. The spiral stairs groaned as if someone heavy were climbing them. I held my breath, hoping to remain unseen. The shadow passed over the doorway to the beacon room, and then I heard the footsteps stop directly behind me. I didn't turn around, because I knew she was smiling. By the fifth night, I was running out of ways to cope. I refused to leave the lighthouse, despite the warnings etched in the logs and the fear clawing at my chest. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I started documenting everything: the whispers, the shadows, the strange cold spots that formed around the spiral staircase. Every time I wrote, the ink seemed to freeze on the page, small frost crystals forming where my hands had touched. The fog outside thickened, curling in tendrils that pressed against the windows. At 1:47 a.m., the lanterns went out completely, plunging me into darkness. The air grew heavy, like breathing underwater. Then came the voice, soft, deliberate, close to my ear. You see the light, but the light sees you. The spiral staircase creaked under weight that wasn't mine. My heart hammered as the shadow began to descend toward me, slowly, deliberately, with that cold, hollow smile. I realized then that the lighthouse itself was alive, or haunted by something that had claimed it long ago. I tried to flee, rushing down the stairs, but the shadows multiplied. Each step echoed unnaturally, as if the lighthouse itself was mocking me. The walls stretched and warped, elongating the spiral into something endless. I stumbled into the main chamber where the beacon sat. The light above was spinning wildly, faster than any human could manage, casting jagged shadows that crawled across the walls. I could feel her presence behind me, closer, heavier, cold enough to burn my skin. Then I heard whispers from everywhere at once. Hundreds of voices, murmuring, pleading, laughing. They spoke in a rhythm, the same one I had heard in the logs. The air was alive with sound and motion. I felt the cold hand again, brushing my shoulder. But this time, it was followed by a pressure against my chest, like the lighthouse itself was trying to pull me upward, into the beacon, into the light. I screamed, but the sound bounced back at me, distorted. And then I was falling, not down the stairs, but into darkness. When I regained consciousness, I was sprawled at the base of the spiral staircase, shivering, soaked in sweat and sea spray. The lighthouse felt different. The walls no longer seemed solid. They pulsed, breathing with the fog outside. I tried to leave, but the door refused to open. It wasn't locked. It was as if the structure itself had decided I couldn't leave. Panic gripped me as I realized the whispers had grown louder, speaking not just my name, but my thoughts, my fears, my regrets. I ran up the stairs, seeking the beacon. Maybe if I reached the light, I could find control. But with every step, the shadows multiplied. They formed faces, countless, hollow, watching me with that same dreadful smile. Then the voice spoke again, calm, almost gentle, and it cut through the chaos. You cannot leave. Not yet. The light needs you. I stopped, frozen, understanding with a sinking dread that the lighthouse had chosen me as its keeper, and not by consent. I tried to resist, pacing the beacon room, hands pressed to my head to block out the whispers. The air grew colder with every passing second, frost forming along the metal railing. The shadows began moving independently of the light, floating along walls, creeping over the floor, and multiplying with impossible speed. Then I saw it. A figure, not quite human, standing directly in the center of the beacon's rotating light. Its form shimmered, flickering like broken glass, eyes hollow, mouth stretched into a grin that felt alive. It raised a hand, pointing directly at me, "You are the light now," it said, voice layered with hundreds of other whispers. The beacon spun faster, faster, until I felt the wind pulling at me, tugging me upward, closer to the light. My body didn't respond. My limbs felt heavy, as if the lighthouse itself was holding me. And in that moment, I realized that the light I had revered, the guiding beacon for sailors, was a trap, and I was its next keeper. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the spinning light and the whispers. The shadows pressed closer, wrapping around me without touching. My body felt weightless, yet anchored, as if the lighthouse itself had claimed me. Every heartbeat echoed in the walls, amplified by the pulsing beacon. I tried to fight, but my hands passed through the railing, my feet through the floor. I was suspended between reality and something else entirely. The pale figure hovered above me, her hollow eyes boring into my mind. She whispered secrets of the lighthouse, voices of past keepers who had disappeared, all absorbed into the light, their consciousness now part of the structure. I realized with terror that I was next. Resistance only made the pull stronger. The wind howled, fog swirled like living smoke, and the light illuminated faces in the shadows, all staring, smiling, waiting. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I was no longer standing. I was floating within the light itself, an unwilling part of the beacon's eternal watch. When the sun rose over Prince Edward Island, the lighthouse appeared silent and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. The waves crashed against the cliffs, gulls called, and the fog had lifted. Sailors passing by saw the light spinning as usual, guiding ships safely. But no one could see the truth. Inside, I exist in a way I cannot fully explain. I can see everything that happens in the lighthouse, hear every whisper and creak, trapped within the spinning beacon. I am still aware, still conscious, but no longer free. The previous keepers' voices mingle with mine, guiding the light, warning the unwary, yet powerless to stop the cycle. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the fog returns, I hear a voice on the cliffs below. A new keeper, wandering too close, hearing the lighthouse calling them. And I know the moment is coming when the light will choose again. The lighthouse never forgets. The lighthouse never releases. My name is Evan Mercer, and this happened when I was 24, leading a small winter hiking group in Banff National Park. We were seasoned campers, confident in our gear and knowledge. But nothing could prepare us for what we encountered. The first night, we set up camp near a frozen creek, the mountains looming above like silent sentinels. Snow fell lightly, dusting our tents in white, and the wind carried the distant howl of wolves, or so we thought. By midnight, everything was quiet, too quiet. I woke to see my group huddled around the fire, but something was off. Their movements were rigid, like marionettes, faces pale beneath their frost-covered jackets. When I called their names, no one responded. The snow around our camp was untouched, except for strange footprints. Too long, too wide, and impossibly deep, leading toward the tree line and then disappearing. A low groaning sound began drifting from the forest, rising and falling in rhythm with the wind. My stomach sank. This was no ordinary night in the Rockies. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped toward the tree line, heart pounding. The wind seemed to shift, carrying voices, barely audible at first, then clearly whispering our names. Evan. Evan. The snow deepened beneath my boots, yet the footprints I had seen earlier didn't reappear. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them. I scanned the shadows, but the trees were still, silent and impossibly tall. Then I saw movement. A figure at the edge of the clearing, half shrouded in mist, staring at us. Its body was unnaturally thin, elongated, pale as ice. It didn't walk. It glided over the snow, leaving no trace. The others didn't see it, or they didn't react. They remained huddled around the fire, still and unblinking. I tried shaking one of them, but they didn't respond. Panic gripped me as the figure slowly raised an arm, pointing toward the mountains, a silent command. That's when I realized the truth. We weren't the ones observing the forest anymore. The forest, and whatever lived in it, was observing us. I backed away from the fire, trying to keep the figure in sight while keeping the others between us. But when I glanced back, the campers had shifted. Their eyes were now completely black, voids that reflected nothing of the light around them. They weren't moving, but they weren't alive either. The figure glided closer, and I could see its face now. Hollow, smooth, frozen, like a statue carved from ice, with no mouth but an awareness that cut straight into my mind. It didn't speak, but I understood its intent. It wanted us to follow, one by one, into the mountains, into the snow that would swallow us completely. I grabbed my radio and tried calling the ranger station, but there was nothing, just static, and in the static I could swear I heard my own voice screaming. The figure stopped a few yards from the fire, waiting patiently. It didn't chase, it didn't move aggressively, it simply commanded. And I knew that if we disobeyed, it would come for us anyway. I yelled at the campers, shaking one violently. No response. The black eyes stared straight through me, unblinking, as if I didn't exist. The fire crackled, casting erratic shadows, and the figure raised an impossibly long arm, pointing toward the mountains once more. A cold wind swept through the clearing, strong enough to knock me off balance. I caught sight of the footprints again, larger now, crisscrossing the campsite, moving closer toward us. The snow seemed to ripple under some invisible weight, folding unnaturally, as if the forest itself were breathing. Panic took over. I grabbed a flare and ignited it, waving it around. The light burned red through the fog, and for a brief second, the camper's black eyes flickered. Just a fraction, a hint of recognition. Then the figure vanished. No sound, no trace. Only the snow, pristine and undisturbed, except for the massive footprints leading toward the tree line. I understood then. We weren't going to be left alone. This was only the beginning. Night had fully descended, and the wind picked up, howling through the tree line like the cries of 1,000 lost souls. I couldn't move the campers. They remained rigid, frozen in place, and the fire flickered weakly under the gusts. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I had nowhere to go. The mountains loomed above, dark and silent, and the forest around us seemed alive, watching, calculating. Then I heard it, a whispering, faint at first, carried on the wind, circling the campsite. It said our names, my name, the others' names. The figure had returned, this time more than one. Shadows began forming among the trees, indistinct but vast, moving toward us without leaving footprints. Desperation clawed at me. I grabbed my backpack and radio, desperate to call for help. But when I keyed the microphone, the static answered with voices, mocking, distorted, repeating everything I had just said. And then I realized the forest itself was a trap. I knew I had to act quickly. I grabbed two of the campers, dragging them toward the path we had come from, but the snow resisted us, deep and shifting unnaturally beneath our feet. The black-eyed stares followed me, unflinching, and the whispering grew louder, echoing in my ears. Suddenly, the figure appeared again, this one closer, taller, more imposing than before. Its pale, elongated form glimmered in the weak light of the fire, and its hollow eyes bore into mine. I could feel the cold radiating off it, like frostbite in my soul. I threw a flare toward the forest. The light reflected off the snow, briefly illuminating dozens of similar figures emerging from the fog, their presence overwhelming, surrounding us. The wind carried their whispers directly into my mind, repeating threats, commands, and promises of ice-filled eternity. I understood then. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a hunt. And we were the prey. We ran blindly through the snow, the forest closing in on all sides. Every step seemed heavier, the air thicker, like we were wading through frozen molasses. The figures followed, silent but relentless, gliding over the snow without leaving a trace. The whispers became a constant roar inside my skull, echoing with our names, mocking our fear. One of the campers stumbled and fell, and I froze. The figure hovered over them, motionless, yet the temperature dropped sharply. Frost formed on their hair and eyelashes almost instantly. I grabbed their arm and pulled, but the shadow lingered, like a predator savoring the moment. The path we had marked earlier was gone. Snow had covered it completely, leaving us disoriented. Every tree looked the same, every direction a dead end. The wind carried glimpses of movement, more figures, emerging silently from the fog, their presence pressing down on me like a living weight. And I realized with horror, the forest didn't just hunt us. It was rewriting the world around us. We tried to climb a small ridge, hoping for higher ground, but the snow and wind made every step treacherous. The whispers followed, now forming coherent phrases, urging us to stop, to lie down, to surrender. Every instinct told me to fight. But the forest was alive, reshaping itself, bending paths and trees as if it had a mind. Then, in the faint glow of the flare, I saw them. Hundreds of the figures emerging from the mist, surrounding us in a perfect circle. Their movements were synchronized, slow, deliberate. The black-eyed campers I had dragged were now eerily still, frozen mid-step, as if puppets under some invisible hand. I realized the figures weren't just hunting us. They were assimilating, marking us, turning us into something else. A soft, chilling voice echoed in my mind. Join us. Become the snow. Become the forest. I understood then that the only way to survive was to keep moving. But there might be no escape. Exhaustion and fear clawed at me as I stumbled through the snow. The forest had become an alien labyrinth. Paths twisted, trees shifted, and the wind carried the whispers of the figures behind me. The campers I had dragged were gone, either taken or consumed. But I could still feel them in the air, cold and distant, like echoes. Then I saw it. A massive shadow ahead, larger than any figure before, its form indistinct but pulsing with an otherworldly presence. The whispers converged into a single, deafening voice that drilled into my mind. Become part of the winter. Resist, and you will freeze forever. I ran faster, tripping over snow-laden roots, my lungs burning, my heart pounding. Every step felt like being dragged backward. The figures advanced silently, enveloping me in cold, pressing against my skin as if I were already trapped in their world. The fog thickened, swallowing me completely, and I realized the forest wasn't just hunting me, it was rewriting me. When I awoke, I was lying in a clearing at dawn, the snow calm and undisturbed. The wind had died, the fog lifted, and the forest seemed silent, innocent even. But something had changed. I was different. My body ached with cold that no fire could warm, and every breath felt heavy, as though the forest itself weighed on me. I looked around. No footprints, no signs of the figures, no sign of the campers. Yet in the distance, faint shadows flitted between the trees, and the whispers returned, soft, insidious, calling my name. I stumbled back towards civilization. But I knew the truth. Once the forest had marked you, it never let go. The figures weren't gone. They were waiting, patient, reshaping the snow, preparing for the next group of travelers. Sometimes, at night, I can hear the whispers through the wind, and I know with a sinking certainty that the forest is still hunting. The snow never forgets. My name is Hannah Reed, and this happened when I was 27, taking a solo retreat to a remote cabin near Jasper National Park. I had wanted solitude, a break from the chaos of life. But solitude came with a price I never imagined. The cabin sat at the edge of a dense forest, half hidden behind pine and spruce. A narrow trail led to it, barely visible beneath the fallen needles and snow. On the first night, the forest seemed alive, the wind carrying strange whispers, low and melodic, as though the trees themselves were speaking. I brushed it off as imagination, fatigue, or the sound of wildlife. Around midnight, I woke to the smell of smoke. Not from the cabin, but from the trees outside. I peered through the window. Shadows moved between the trunks, shapes that flickered in and out of sight. They were human-like, yet impossibly tall and thin. And then I noticed something terrifying. The trail I had walked in on was gone. Completely gone, swallowed by the forest as if it had never existed. I stepped outside, heart pounding, flashlight in hand, trying to retrace my steps. The snow-covered ground was smooth, untouched, and the forest seemed endless. Every sound was amplified: the crack of a branch, the distant howl of an animal, and the whispers that had started low, but were now forming words I could almost understand. Stay. Stay forever. I spun around, shining the light in every direction. Shapes moved between the trees, disappearing whenever I tried to focus. Panic set in as I realized the cabin itself seemed to have shifted. Its door was no longer aligned with the porch. The walls appeared to stretch slightly, bending unnaturally. I ran back inside, slamming the door. The whispers grew louder, now inside the cabin, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Every corner seemed alive, every shadow moving just beyond the edge of vision. It was then I understood. I wasn't lost in the forest. I was trapped in the forest's mind. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was exhaustion, isolation, or imagination. But the cabin had changed. Furniture shifted subtly when I wasn't looking. Shadows lingered in corners longer than physics allowed. And the faint whispers continued, repeating my name with malicious patience. Determined to escape, I opened the door and stepped outside again. The forest greeted me with an unnatural stillness. The path was nowhere to be seen. The trees leaned closer, their branches interlocking overhead like a suffocating roof. Every step I took felt heavier, the snow underfoot resisting movement. And then I saw them. Figures emerging silently from between the trees. They weren't running, walking, or gliding. They simply appeared tall, skeletal, and impossibly thin, their eyes black voids that reflected nothing. One pointed at me. A cold, low voice echoed inside my head. "You cannot leave. This is ours now." I realized the forest wasn't just hiding the path. It had erased it entirely, bending reality, and I was the intruder. I ran blindly through the snow, trying to find any familiar landmark. But the cabin itself had shifted. Its windows were now higher, its walls elongated, almost impossible to comprehend. I could feel the eyes of the forest on me. Countless, patient, waiting. Every whisper now was a sentence. Commands, warnings, threats. Step closer. Stay forever. Belong to us. I shouted back, demanding the forest release me. But the sound bounced mockingly against the trees. A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Unlike the others, it moved slowly, deliberately, its pale face expressionless but commanding. It gestured, and the other figures parted, creating a path that led deeper into the forest, as though I were being invited or herded. I hesitated, heart hammering. I knew this was a trap, but every instinct screamed that the forest had already decided my fate. The snow began to shift beneath me, forming strange patterns, unnatural and hypnotic. And I understood. The forest itself wanted me inside it. I forced myself to move forward, following the path the figures had opened. The snow beneath me shifted unnaturally with every step, forming ridges and depressions as though guiding me. The whispers had grown louder, layering over each other until I couldn't tell my own thoughts from theirs. Occasionally, a figure would appear closer, its black eyes staring into mine, studying me. I felt my resolve weakening, my body trembling as the cold and fear crept deeper into my bones. I tried to call out, but my voice seemed muffled, swallowed by the forest itself. Then I saw a faint light ahead, a glow that looked like the cabin, but wrong. The walls pulsed, the windows elongated, shadows moving across them in impossible ways. The figures flanked me, silent, patient, watching my reaction. I realized then that this cabin was alive, not in the usual sense, but as a sentient trap. It had absorbed the forest, the snow, the shadows, and now it was trying to consume me. I approached cautiously, heart racing. The closer I got, the more the cabin warped. The door stretched upward, the walls seemed to bend toward me, and the windows flickered with ghostly movement. I could hear faint whispers, repeating the same sentence over and over. Join us. Become one with the cabin. I glanced at the forest behind me. The figures hadn't moved. They seemed content to let the cabin do the work. My hands shook as I reached for the doorknob. The metal was icy, impossibly cold, as though freezing my very soul. As I pushed the door open, the inside was darker than night itself. Shadows pooled in every corner, moving with intent. The cabin seemed to breathe, the floorboards groaning under invisible weight. My flashlight flickered, revealing walls covered in scratches, names, dates. Countless people who had come here before me. I understood in that instant. The cabin didn't just trap you, it consumed your life, your soul, your existence. I stepped further inside, the floorboards groaning underfoot as though warning me to leave. The shadows shifted with each movement, stretching and twisting like living tendrils. The air smelled of smoke and decay, a sickly, sweet odor that made my stomach churn. Every whisper was now unmistakable, voices overlapping, some pleading, some mocking. Stay. Stay forever. I noticed something horrifying on the far wall. Reflections, not from mirrors, but from the cabin itself. Faces stared back at me, twisted, frozen in silent screams. I could see the campers I had brought with me, their eyes wide with terror, slowly turning black, merging with the shadows, becoming part of the cabin. Panic clawed at me, but I realized the cabin wasn't just observing. It was aware of me, reading my fear, anticipating my every move. My pulse raced, my breath short. As I understood the truth, the cabin didn't just trap you physically, it trapped your mind, bending reality until escape was impossible. I had to keep moving, or I would disappear next. I ran toward the far end of the cabin, hoping to find a window or back door. The shadows followed relentlessly, stretching across the floor, coiling around the walls. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief bursts of light, I could see dozens of faces trapped in the wooden beams, mouths frozen in silent screams. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a deafening roars inside my skull. Each voice seemed to claw at my memory, twisting my thoughts, making me doubt my senses. The figures outside pressed against the windows, their pale, skeletal hands tapping on the glass as if inviting me to join them. I tried to open a window, to escape, but the glass resisted my hands. The cabin shifted subtly beneath me, stretching and compressing, trapping me in a space that no longer followed the laws of physics. And then I realized, with bone-deep horror, the cabin didn't want me to escape. It wanted me to become part of it. Like the countless others before me, desperation took hold. I tried to sprint toward the back of the cabin, but the floor seemed to ripple under my feet, pulling me back like quicksand. The shadows had thickened, coalescing into shapes that mirrored my own movements, mocking me. The whispers were no longer just words. They were visions. Flashes of those who had come before, faces twisted in silent terror, mouths moving as if screaming directly into my mind. I reached the back wall and found a door, or something that resembled one. The handle was icy, burning my hands when I gripped it. As I pushed it open, the cabin seemed to sigh, a living breath that rattled the walls and shook the ceiling. Outside, the forest appeared endless, the snow swirling unnaturally, masking any path to safety. The figures outside pressed closer, their black eyes unblinking, staring straight through me. The voice inside my head became singular, commanding, and impossible to resist. Enter or be claimed forever. I understood then that resistance might only delay the inevitable. I stepped through the door, expecting freedom. Instead, I was met with endless darkness. The forest had vanished, replaced by an infinite void filled with whispers and shadows. The cabin's walls stretched into eternity, pale figures drifting endlessly through the darkness, their hollow eyes watching me. I could feel the presence of every person who had come here before, their essence folded into the cabin's soul. I understood the truth fully. The cabin was alive, and it fed on fear, on souls, bending reality until its prisoners became part of it. I felt my body begin to change, a creeping coldness spreading, my vision blurring as the whispers sank into my mind. I realized then that I was no longer entirely human. I was becoming part of the cabin, part of its darkness, a sentinel for the next traveler foolish enough to enter. The cabin waits. It always waits. And the forest remembers. My name is Lucas Barrett, and this happened when I was 19, camping with friends on the shores of Algonquin Lake. We were excited for a weekend getaway, canoeing, fishing, and enjoying the solitude of the wilderness. But what began as a peaceful retreat soon turned into a nightmare I cannot forget. The first evening, the lake was eerily still. The water glassy, reflecting the moon and trees perfectly. We set up camp on a small peninsula, the dark forest closing in behind us. Around midnight, I woke to a sound unlike anything I'd heard before. A low, rhythmic tapping coming from the water near the edge of our campsite. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the tapping was deliberate, too measured. I shone my flashlight across the water, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. It moved just beneath the surface, huge and humanoid, gliding silently, keeping pace with the shoreline as if studying us. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Something was in the lake, and it was watching. I nudged my friend, pointing toward the shadow, but he laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. "It's probably a log or a reflection," he said. But the moment he looked, the shadows shifted, gliding in perfect unison with the shoreline, moving too fluidly to be natural. The tapping returned, louder now, like nails dragging across the wood of our canoe dock. My heart pounded. I could see faint ripples in the water, small waves forming patterns as if the lake itself were alive, responding to the shadow's presence. Suddenly, a branch snapped from the forest behind us. We all spun around, flashlights sweeping the trees, but nothing was there. When we turned back to the water, the shadow had moved closer, almost touching the shore. A sense of ancient, predatory intelligence emanated from it, a feeling that we were being hunted, studied. Fear froze us in place. The lake wasn't calm anymore. It was waiting. We huddled together, whispering frantically, unsure whether to stay by the fire or flee to the tents. The shadow remained just beyond the water's edge, its dark form unmoving yet impossibly aware. Every reflection in the lake betrayed its presence, twisting in ways that made it seem larger, stretching far beneath the surface. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a large fish, a floating log, but instinct screamed at me that none of this was natural. The shadow moved with intention, perfectly following our movements, circling the campsite in silence. Each tap of the water synchronized with my heartbeat, growing louder, heavier, like it was marking time until something inevitable would occur. One of my friends, Jamie, leaned toward the canoe, trying to investigate. The shadow surged closer, ripples forming around the boat like icy fingers. Jamie froze, staring into the water, and then screamed. Something unseen grabbed her leg beneath the surface, yanking violently, almost dragging her in. We all rushed forward, pulling her back, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. The shadow lingered, patient, watching, waiting. After Jamie was safe, we scrambled back to the fire, trying to stay together. The shadow didn't follow directly, but circled the peninsula, staying just beyond the light's reach. Its presence was palpable, an oppressive force that made the air feel heavy, each breath like inhaling water. I noticed the water itself had changed. Small waves formed unnatural patterns, almost like symbols or letters, shifting as though communicating with the shadow. My friends tried to ignore it, but the tapping persisted, relentless, echoing in our minds. Sleep was impossible. Every time we blinked, the shadow seemed closer. Then came the sound of breathing from the water. Low, guttural, impossible to place. The shadow's ripples intensified, and I glimpsed its form emerging partially from beneath the surface. Tall, elongated limbs, a pale, featureless face just above the waterline. Eyes dark voids that seemed to pierce straight into my soul. We realized then that the shadow wasn't hunting just for food. It wanted something far worse. Fear itself. We decided we had no choice but to leave the lake and head back to the forest, hoping to reach the trail before the shadow cornered us completely. The snow-dusted path was slippery, and each step felt heavier, like wading through invisible resistance. Behind us, the water remained unnaturally still, except for faint ripples following our every movement. The shadow moved with uncanny speed, skimming over the water as if it had no weight. Occasionally, it would pause and extend a limb or claw-like appendage toward us, not attacking, just observing, studying, testing our fear. My friends whispered in panic, voices cracking, trying to reassure each other, but the air was thick with dread, the kind that gnaws at the soul. Then I heard it. the low, guttural sound of water breaking against something massive. The shadow was splitting the surface, creating waves that moved toward us like hands, reaching, grasping. I realized the lake itself had become a weapon, controlled by the entity lurking beneath, and there was no ignoring it. Panic took over as we scrambled through the trees, stumbling over roots and rocks. The shadow stayed at the lake's edge, gliding silently, its presence following us through the forest like a dark pulse. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing from the trees themselves, repeating our names and mocking our desperation. I glanced back. The water had split unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled giant hands reaching out, clawing toward the shore. The shadow's featureless face appeared at the top of the waves, staring directly at me. My chest tightened, lungs burning, but I couldn't stop running. Branches tore at our clothes, roots tripped us, but nothing slowed the entity. It didn't need to move through the forest. It controlled it. Every step we took was being guided, herded toward an unknown destination, toward something it wanted us to see or to become. I realized with chilling clarity, we had not just been observed. We had been chosen. We reached a small clearing, thinking we might finally gain some distance from the lake and its shadow. But as soon as we entered it, the air shifted. The whispers weren't just behind us. They surrounded us, echoing from every direction, reverberating in our minds. Panic clawed at me, and I realized that running might not be enough. The shadow appeared at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by mist. Its movements were deliberate, fluid, and impossibly fast. Every so often, its featureless face would rise above the fog, eyes like voids, staring into our very souls. My friends clutched each other, trembling, and I felt the cold grip of something ancient and intelligent pressing against my chest. Then I noticed it. The forest itself had changed. Trees bent unnaturally, branches forming cage-like structures, and the ground rippled as if alive, guiding us deeper into the woods. It wasn't chasing us. It was directing us, herding us towards something inevitable. Fear turned into icy dread. The shadow was more than a creature. It was a force. We stumbled forward, the fog thickening with every step. The whispers intensified, overlapping into unintelligible chants that pressed directly on our minds, making it hard to distinguish reality from hallucination. My flashlight flickered violently, casting shadows that seemed to move independently, stretching toward us like dark hands. Then I saw the water again, Algonquin Lake, now visible through a break in the trees, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The shadow had returned to the shore, larger than before, ripples in the water forming into the shape of a towering figure. The surface seemed almost solid, reflecting the dark form as if the lake itself had become a mirror of terror. My friends wanted to run to the water, thinking we could confront it or escape. But I held them back. I knew that the lake was no longer a place, it was a trap. Every instinct screamed that if we stepped too close, the shadow would drag us into its domain, never to return. And the shadow waited, patient, intelligent, eternal. Desperation surged through me as we tried to skirt the lake's edge, hoping to find a trail back to safety. The shadow followed relentlessly, gliding across the water with impossible speed, its form stretching unnaturally, as though the lake itself had become an extension of it. Every ripple it created seemed alive, reaching toward us, grasping at our legs and dragging at our shoes. The whispers became voices, speaking directly into our heads. Join us. Become one with the lake. My chest tightened, lungs burning, heart hammering, and I realized that hesitation could be fatal. The water began to glow faintly, revealing shapes beneath the surface. More shadows, countless faceless figures moving toward us. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed as something invisible grabbed her ankle, yanking her toward the lake. We pulled her back with all our strength, but the shadow surged forward, forcing us to retreat deeper into the forest. Panic had fully overtaken reason. We weren't being hunted for sport. We were being chosen. We finally broke through the tree line, thinking we had escaped the lake's edge. But the shadow didn't stop. It followed, its form stretching unnaturally through the trees, sometimes visible, sometimes vanishing into fog. The whispers had become deafening, echoing all around, filling our minds with dread. I turned briefly to glance at the water. The lake was calm again, reflecting the moonlight innocently. But the glow from beneath revealed the truth. The shadow had already marked us. Our reflections on the water were not our own. They were elongated, distorted, faceless, and watching us, waiting. I realized in that moment that we had not escaped. The shadow didn't need to chase. It existed beyond the lake, beyond the forest, patient and eternal, able to reach through memory, fear, and reality itself. We fled, carrying the terror with us. I still hear the whispers at night, reminding me that the shadow waits, and it always remembers. My name is Sophie Laurent, and this happened when I was 24, visiting an old manor in rural Quebec for research on historic estates. I had always been fascinated by abandoned places, but this manor had a reputation I couldn't ignore. Locals whispered about disappearances, strange lights, and cold spots that made people flee. I thought it was just legend until I arrived. The manor loomed as I approached, its stone walls blackened by age, ivy crawling like veins over every surface. Windows were cracked or missing, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Inside, the air was thick with decay, dust motes floating in the weak sunlight that seeped through gaps in the walls. That first night, I explored the grand hallway. A chill ran down my spine as I heard faint footsteps echo behind me. Though I was alone, doors creaked open on their own, and I caught glimpses of shadowy figures disappearing around corners. By midnight, the manor was alive, and it was watching me. I tried to settle into a room on the second floor, but the temperature dropped instantly. The air was thick, suffocating, carrying whispers too low to decipher, yet undeniably directed at me. Every creak of the floorboards sounded amplified, like the manor itself was breathing, stretching, observing. As I unpacked my gear, a shadow moved across the far wall, flickering like a candle in a breeze. I froze, heart hammering, scanning every corner. Nothing should have been there. Yet the figure seemed aware of me, gliding along the wall, vanishing whenever I blinked. Curiosity and terror battled within me. I ventured into the library, a vast room lined with ancient books and furniture draped in white sheets. A sudden cold gust blew through, scattering pages and revealing writing on the floor that hadn't been there moments before. Names, dates, and cryptic messages, as if the manor had been recording the lives and deaths of those who entered. The shadows were not idle. They were learning, preparing, waiting. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak, every whisper felt amplified in the silence. At 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps pacing outside my room. My flashlight flickered as I aimed it at the door. The hallway was empty, yet the echoes of walking continued, moving from the grand staircase to the far end of the manor, deliberate and patient. I decided to follow. Each step I took seemed to awaken the manor, the walls groaning, floors shifting, and doors creaking open in response. A cold wind brushed past me, carrying the faint scent of candle wax and decay. Shadows darted just beyond my flashlight's reach, vanishing whenever I tried to focus. Then I saw a door I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a tattered curtain. It was blackened at the edges, as if burned, yet inviting. From beyond it came a faint, melodic humming, soft, hypnotic, calling my name. I knew I shouldn't enter, but I did. The door creaked open into a room unlike any I had seen before. The walls were lined with mirrors, cracked and fogged with age, reflecting fragmented versions of myself. In the center, a rocking chair moved slowly on its own, empty yet swaying back and forth with unnerving precision. I stepped inside, heart hammering. The humming grew louder, more insistent, echoing inside my skull rather than my ears. Every reflection in the mirrors seemed alive, twisting into grotesque expressions, reaching toward me with impossible angles. I could see other figures in the reflections, shadowy forms of people I didn't recognize, faces pale and featureless, staring directly at me. I tried to back away, but the room seemed to stretch, the door receding as if the manor itself refused to let me leave. The rocking chair stopped, and the whispers became a single voice. Stay. Be remembered. Become part of us. A chill ran through my spine, the air thick with the weight of centuries. I stumbled back from the mirrors, my hands shaking. But the manor wasn't done with me. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in rhythm with my own terrified heartbeat. Shadows stretched across the room, crawling along the cracked floors and warped walls, following every movement I made. The humming had stopped, replaced by whispers in multiple voices, chanting my name in harsh, clipped tones that pierced my mind. As I glanced at the mirrors again, the reflections moved independently of me. The shadowed figures began pointing, nodding, beckoning me toward a corner where the walls were scorched black. I could see faint outlines of other objects hidden within the darkness. Old furniture, chains, and objects that looked like remnants of previous visitors. Panic surged, but curiosity kept me moving. I approached the corner, heart hammering, breath short, and realized that the manor wasn't just haunted, it was alive. It was feeding on memory, fear, and the essence of those who dared to enter its walls. The blackened corner revealed a trapdoor in the floor, ancient and rotting. I hesitated, my mind screaming to leave, but the whispers became commands. Descend, join us. Be remembered. Every instinct urged me to turn and run, but my curiosity and terror compelled me forward. I lifted the trapdoor, the hinges creaking loudly, echoing through the manor. A foul stench wafted upward, earth, decay, and something else I could not name. Inside, the darkness seemed to move independently, shifting like a living substance, pulsating with a malevolent awareness. I shone my flashlight down, revealing a staircase descending into complete blackness. As I stepped down, the shadows on the walls twisted toward me, reaching with impossibly long fingers. The air thickened, each breath a struggle. I felt as if unseen eyes were drilling into my mind, cataloging every fear, every hesitation. I realized with bone-deep horror that this basement was not a room. It was a maw. And I was the next meal. The basement air was suffocating, thick with the scent of mold and decay. Each step down the rotting staircase made the shadows writhe and stretch, reacting to my presence as if the manor were alive. Faint whispers rose around me, overlapping into a single, deafening chant that pressed against my skull. At the bottom, the flashlight revealed the full horror. The room was lined with old portraits, but the faces weren't human. They were distorted, pale, faceless, each one frozen in terror. Chains hung from the ceiling and walls, swinging slightly as if moved by unseen hands. In the far corner, a faint glow revealed something moving, a dark shape that shifted in ways that defied anatomy, sometimes two-dimensional, sometimes towering and immense. I felt it watching me, analyzing, learning, testing my fear. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. I knew the manor wasn't just a building, it was a predator, patient and intelligent, feeding on dread, luring me deeper into its heart. I tried to back away, but the shadows moved with me, stretching like liquid across the floor, forming tendrils that reached for my ankles. My flashlight flickered, and in the dim light, I could see more figures emerging from the walls themselves. Spectral silhouettes of previous intruders, frozen in silent screams, their faces blending with the shadows. A low, resonant hum filled the room, vibrating through my chest. It wasn't just sound, it was presence, forcing my body to move toward the glowing corner, toward the heart of the basement. Fear burned in my veins, but I couldn't resist. I stepped closer, and the shadows reacted instantly, wrapping around the corners of the room like liquid smoke, guiding me. In that moment, I understood the cruel truth. The manor didn't kill to feed. It trapped, it harvested, it transformed. The more terrified you were, the more it thrived. My every instinct screamed to run, but the basement would not allow it. I stepped closer to the glowing corner, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The shadows rippled and shifted, forming vague shapes. Faces contorted in fear, reaching toward me as if begging for release. The whispers became coherent words, repeating over and over. Stay, become one, be remembered. My heart pounded, every nerve screaming to flee, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath me groaned, and I sank slightly, as if the manor itself were swallowing me. Chains wrapped around my ankles, cold and unyielding, yet invisible. I could feel the cold brush of unseen fingers along my arms, my neck, my back. Panic surged, yet I was mesmerized by the glow. It seemed alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that drew me closer, deeper into the basement's heart. I realized, with crushing dread, that the manor had claimed me. I wasn't an intruder anymore. I was its next story, another whisper in its walls, waiting for the next curious soul to enter. The final moment came with a sudden silence. The whispers stopped. The shadows froze mid-motion. Only the glow remained, now searing in intensity, engulfing me completely. I felt my consciousness stretching, twisting, fragmenting, as the manor absorbed my fear, my essence, every thought I had brought with me. When my senses returned, I was staring at the basement from a distance I couldn't explain. The manor was still, the shadows gone. Only the portraits remained, their blank faces now subtly shifting, one in particular, my own, etched into the wall. I understood then that I had become part of it. The manor didn't kill, it preserved. It cataloged its victims in terror, forever haunting anyone who dared enter its cursed halls. I left Quebec Manor, but the whispers never left me. At night, I hear them calling, reminding me that I am not free, and the manor is always waiting. As the shadows of Quebec Manor, Algonquin Lake, and the other dark corners of Canada fade from view, remember this. The horrors you've witnessed tonight are not figments of imagination. They are echoes of real fear, stories told by those who lived through them, who stared into the abyss and returned forever changed. from the haunted forests to abandoned manors, from lakes that hide monstrous shapes to shadows that follow relentlessly. The darkness of our world is closer than we think. These tales are a reminder that fear is timeless, and sometimes it waits patiently in forgotten corners, ready to claim the next curious soul. Keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of the unseen. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.